While with communism, you have hundreds of authors, right? So conservatism is a bit hard to track down in this regard because there are very few pure conservatives. Most conservatives are obsessed with one issue that they write about their whole life. Also, it's hard to look at the history of political thought from the perspective of conservatism, because if you see it as a position and you compare it to today, well, everybody's conservative of the past, right? Even people that are on the left in the past are to some extent conservative. I don't know what Karl Marx's opinion on gay people was, but I'm certain he at least made jokes about it, right? At the minimum. I do know his opinion on black people. His son-in-law was black, so he was not racist. But by today's standards, right, almost all thinkers of the past are at some way, Rousseau, for example, generally seen as progressive. I guess on gender, he's still good old machismo. So, but so was everyone in the 18th century, right? So this doesn't mean too much necessarily, right? We cannot look at if a person was conservative on a particular issue and call that conservatism. The other problem with conservatives is that conservatives are particularly inconsistent. All ideologies are inconsistent to some extent, but there is a difference between them, and conservatism, both in conservatives, as in the people, and the theory, is consistently less consistent, let's say. And if you know any conservatives, you will notice this once you start talking to them. Now, why is this? In their defense, conservatives will say, well, yeah, man, but life is inconsistent, right? Society is chaotic. You cannot always have the same position. People are complex and deep, and so am I. Plus, the real conservative will actually defend this. He will say, yeah, but consistency itself is dangerous, right? Who are consistent? Only radicals. Communists are consistent. You don't want to be with them, right? Consistency, having principles and actually sticking to them, that's what radicals do, and radicals are dangerous. So it's okay. Plus, conservatism doesn't necessarily care too much about the truth on a theoretical level. Truth and logic and these kind of things are often enemies of the things they defend, like religion. They're much more interested in what works rather than what is logically consistent. We know that what we are defending works because we've been doing it for hundreds of years, right? That is much more important than your theoretical point you're making, silly progressive. And conservatism, lastly, the main reason why it appears inconsistent is because you have many different types of conservatism or many different positions, and the same person does not necessarily hold all of them. You could be culturally conservative and socially conservative, but you could be anti-capitalist, for example. In that regard, you are conservative in some ways, but not in others, and this will appear as an inconsistency. So you might ask the question, well, does conservatism even exist then, right? Does it have a core? Is there something we can talk about? The answer is obviously going to be yes, otherwise I would stop my lecture here. But conservatives try to argue this. They'll try to say that there is no core. They'll say that, well, conservatism really, it's a position, or it's an attitude, or it's an emotion. It's a way of being, right? It's a lifestyle rather than an ideology. We don't make big plans about the world, right? We don't try to impose things on you, of course they do. But they will deny that this is a consistent thing. And there is something to it. It's more true than with other ideologies, right? Conservatism is less clear-cut than liberalism is, for example. Yet, I am talking about it because conservatism is constant over time. You consistently in the last 300 years have had conservative parties in most countries. So that must mean something. It's not just an emotion then. And they have things in common. They have similar principles, similar assumptions about human nature, about society that we can analyze. And very important also, they have the same tactics and arguments. We'll talk about that another time, but they behave in political sphere in a similar way. So there is something to talk about. And then to come with a very simple definition, as political theory, conservatism seeks to preserve the social relations of a given community. Now that's very broad, because social relations can mean a lot of things, right? It could be between man and woman, that could be the labor market, that could be family. There's a lot of things that could be social relationships. But in general, if you have to say something that connects them all, it would be this. Again, that can mean many things, right? And that means different things over time. In our times, your average conservative party is going to be primarily focused on property, defending property and property rights and things that come with that, which puts them on the right of the political spectrum. They'll be primarily focused on religious values and religious inspired social relationships. And they will be focused on a kind of balance of power idea, where all interests in society, particularly the powerful interests, are represented in politics. Now we're going to unpack all these things, right? This is not just this slide. But this is where I want to go, let's say, when we talk about conservatism, right? So far so good, Miss Sophia and Miss Mariana? And the other invisible too?
Yeah. Yes, everything
Okay.
good.
Okay. Now I will, as always, I will try to be fair, right? I'm kind of neutral on conservatism. So I think this is a more positive lecture than I could have made, but we'll see. Now, where does it come from, right? You could say that conservatism is as old as humanity, because you always had people who were against a proposal and therefore conservative. But that is not an ideology, right? That's just a position. As an ideology, as a kind of consistent thought, conservatism came around the time where they actually had to defend something. Because before that, you could be conservative on a single choice. But society as a whole was not changing, right? You had 1,800 years of Christian rule. You had 1,800 years of monarchies. Like, things were more or less stable in the macro sense. But that changed with the French Revolution. With the French Revolution, there was an actual opportunity to radically change these social relationships. And this is when conservatives, they always existed, but they never really spoke out loud or wrote like big books. This is when they had to come to the forefront and organize as a faction. The word conservatism is by Chateaubriand, I think, is a French conservative, Marquis. Anyway, the word conservatism comes from this time. Its most famous representative, and let's say the original conservative of modern conservatism that's actually organized, is probably Burke, Edmund Burke. I don't know if you've heard of this man. He was a Irish, I think, politician who was more or less the speaker of the right wing in politics, and their main guy who wrote essays and books for the conservative wing of British politics. And his most famous work is his response to the French Revolution of 1790. So this is, I think, 2 years after the revolution started happening. So here this is where he basically says, okay, playtime's over. This was all some nonsense. We need to stop this. We need to go back to the old order. And here is why. And he establishes a whole theory of why it's better not to change things. And that's more or less the point where modern conservatism started. Now, I'm not going to reproduce necessarily his argument, which is way too long, but I can reproduce to you the general conservative argument against change, right? Against why other ideologies are wrong, and why you shouldn't try to be liberal or socialist or communist or any of these things. Nationalist maybe, but the others, why they are enemies. The core idea of conservatism, and this it shares with other right-wing ideologies, it shares this with liberalism and nationalism, is that the world, at the end of the day, the world is good. The world is balanced. At least it's as good as it could be. There's some fundamental fairness to how it works. Nationalists will say because it's naturally like that. Liberals will say because we found the perfect system. And conservatives will say it's naturally good because we had 10,000s of years of making it better. And now we kind of reached something that works, right? And thus changing it is dangerous because we have something that works. And if you, silly communist, want to change that, you're going to bring hell upon us. Why? First of all, because you can't really change it. The French Revolution came with the idea that society is malleable, like clay, that you can remake it into something else. Conservatives say, not really. It's possible to change it a bit, but not completely. Why? Because, first of all, because human nature won't allow it. People are a certain way, and they will more or less gravitate back to their natural way of living together, which is the current way. And we'll soon talk about how that's going to create problems. But also society cannot be changed that easily. You cannot just make a plan and then do it, because all the problems that society has today are going to come back in your new plan, and you didn't account for them, right? Society is way too complex, and you cannot just think it away. You cannot think its complexity away by, for example, having socialism. Socialism will eventually revert back to our normal system because of problems it has, right? Plus, people are the problem. Conservatives have an overall negative view of human nature, or more negative than the others. More negative than liberals and communists and socialists do. Not socialists, more negative than communists and liberals do. They say that, first of all, man is complex. Liberals have a kind of simple view of human nature often, where they just calculate things and do what's best. This is not true at all. People are not necessarily reasonable, nor should they be. And people are imperfect. There is a bad side to humans, and you are not going to change that by changing some law or inventing communism or that. People are people, and they will fail you, and that will bring your new system down. So better not try at all, right? Here they're mostly in disagreement with communism. Communism will say, no, we can change people. If we change society, if we change education, we will create less thieves than you had right now, for example. But conservatives don't think that. They say the only thing you can do with these flawed humans, right, is pray to Jesus for him to save them, but also, well, tradition and duties and community and the family has more or less tempered this as good as possible, right? Our traditions, we the conservatives, we found a way of making people behave as good as we can by telling them religious stories and community supervision and things like that. So don't change this, because you're opening the gates to hell, right? If you try anyway, if you try to change society, this is hubris. It's over courage. You're too courageous, and this will bring doom upon you. Look at any Greek tragedy, right? They try too hard, the hero, and then things fall down. You, like Oedipus, will end up sleeping with your mother because you try to push too much, and then you have to poke your own eyes out. You don't want this. So it's bad, right? There can be change, but it must come naturally, not because some guy had an idea of how to do it. Now, in the words of a real conservative, because I'm playing some theater here, right? Do you, silly progressive, really think you know better than history? As Edmund Burke, who always sits up straight in his chair, like he would say, we're afraid, let me try this with a British accent, we are afraid to put men to live and trade each on their own stock of reason, because we suspect that this stock in each man is small, and that the individual would do better to avail themselves of the general bank of capital, of nations and of the ages. In other words, you are kind of stupid. Therefore, stop making plans on what to do, right? and look at what is written before you. Look at what we, the smart people, have done and build on that. Don't come with no silly plans. This is the conservative attitude that I try to, well, communicate to you, right? So we shouldn't change too many things around here. And that's why you have a general need for conservatism. Now we're going to get real with this, because so far it was a bit more clowning my lecture. I want to talk today about, let's say, a theory that is mine. This is not from a book, but after giving it a lot of thought, I think this is the best way to explain it. So what I'm going to tell you today, you won't find. You can Google it. It's not going to come up, or it might come up, but it will mean something different. But I am convinced this is the best way of explaining it. And therefore, dear students, you're my guinea pigs, and we are going to do it like this. We're going to do this experiment. So I claim, I'll write an essay about this one day. I claim that conservatism has layers to it, that there are fundamentally three types of conservatism that are layered. You have one at the core, and then you have two to the outside. You have power conservatism in the middle. I'm going to explain all of these, right? That's the rest of my lecture. You have power conservatism in the middle. You have social conservatism around that. And on the outside, you have cultural conservatism. And they are roughly independent in the sense that you could have one without the other. In a conservative party, you get all three of them, of course. But in terms of public opinion, or in terms of individuals that have an idea, they can function separately from each other. And that makes it very confusing. Because when we talk about conservatives, or be conservative, it fundamentally can mean three different things. And when we engage with conservatives, we usually only engage with the outer two layers. They're the visible ones, let's say, of conservatism. It's social and cultural conservatism. But there is a third type of conservatism that lays beneath all of this, which is the power one. So that is what I'm going to try to do in this lecture. Go through these layers, starting on the outside, working our way in, and explaining you how these interact with politics at large. And how conservatism relates itself to other positions in the world. Are you okay with that? Or should I start over?
It's fine. I just want to say that I think that conservatism talks from a place of privilege, because if they don't want to change, it must be because they feel good, like how the world is working. Well, yeah.
That is partly true. We're going to talk about that. But there is another pole too that drives conservatives, and that is not comfort but fear. Conservatism is also driven by fear, which is a very different emotion, and a little bit easier to identify with, which is mainly the social conservatism. And from love, it's also driven by love. Driven by privilege, fear, and love. Those are the three layers. Let's start with love. Let's start with cultural conservatism, right? So cultural conservatives, in general, are about tradition. They value traditions. They think that tradition itself is a good thing. The fact that something is traditional is an argument, right? It's something to revere. It's something to pay respect to. Now, modern conservatives, self-conscious conservatives, they know that traditions are inventions. Right, before that, before the Enlightenment, you could be conservative and just think, oh, this is how God wanted it, right? And this is how it is, and there's no other way of doing this, because you live in Ireland and you didn't know it was possible to do it different, right? But modern conservatives have rid themselves of this fantasy, and they know that traditions are conventions, that they are constructs. But at the same time, they say, well, we need to do this. We could do it differently, but that wouldn't get us anywhere, because these conventions are what make us human. You can argue against Christmas, but that doesn't make it better, right? It's still people like coziness, and people like traditions, and people like rites of passage, and like to celebrate the new year and all these things. So that doesn't make it better. These conventions are us, as Burke said, humans are art. So you cannot complain that we make arty things. We need to give identity ourselves. We need these traditions. This goes back all the way to our man Aristotle. Aristotle, if you remember from last semester, had this idea that human potential only comes out in community. That only when we live together and we engage with each other, that we're going to do more complex things, theater, for example, that would show us what humans really are. Only in theater, for which you need an audience, you cannot do it on your own, right? Are we going to express certain aspects of human nature that wouldn't come out as an individual? So in a way, all these traditions show us different sides of humanity. They give meaning to life, right? Yes, you could do everything different than your culture, but that is not going to be better. You will live in a less meaningful world. You will be in many ways less human, because there will be less aspects of humanity to connect to. And if I just say this, it sounds vague, but this is kind of an emotional thing that you also have to feel. I do believe that people who live close to their culture in general are happier. Just like if you feel bad, watching a lot of movies or listening to music makes you feel better, because it connects to general narrative, general storylines, general ways. In general, culture is about how you cope with life, right? Music, movies, etc., theater are about that fundamentally. And the closer you are to that, the easier you'll find it to cope with life, the more comfortable you will be with your own identity. I'm playing the conservative here, right? You can shave off your head and claim that you're transgender and never wear pants, but you'll probably be seeing a psychologist every week, right? I know very little people, I'm playing the conservative now, who got better from doing this. So these traditions, they might be criticizable, they could be different, we could stop them, but we won't get a better world if we do that, because humans kind of need them. So these traditions, they have value in themselves, because they, in the tradition, in the culture, they express a certain aspect of human nature, whether it's faith in religion or bravery, etc. Let me give you an example. Let's take sex segregated education, boys only schools. The conservative defense of a boy, the truly culturally conservative defense of a boy only school is not that girls are bad, um, or anything like that, or there's anything wrong with mixing it. It's that if you separate boys, you just get something unique, right? There is something to a boys only college. There is more sports, there's more camaraderie, there's no distraction. You create a different type of boy from separating them. Not necessarily a better boy, but it is a path that has value in itself. There's something to this tradition that is not better, but different than the alternative. Because it gives expression to a certain characteristic. It forms a certain type of man that we might need in society, right? It's not to say that mixing is bad, but this in itself has value. There would be a true cultural conservative argument for it. Plus, if we follow tradition, tradition is all the wisdom of the past, right? It's all the norms and values of the past. And by following it, we preserve it and we keep it alive. Because maybe we'll need it later on. But if you don't follow a tradition, it dies. So you don't want to take that risk, right? We want to stay connected to our ancestors and to every good things that come with them. Also because, well, society without norms is dangerous, right? So the safest thing to do is just to stick with the norms we already have and the values we already have to keep them alive. Otherwise, you get nihilism, and nihilism is not too interesting. And I agree with that position fully. Not that I'm a cultural conservative, but it's kind of hard for me to explain things and not to sound like it's my opinion. But anyway, so what is cultural conservatism in practice then? Cultural conservatism is usually the most harmless part of conservatism because it is inherently defensive. It's people defending what they are doing, right? Not necessarily what you're doing. It's them defending their own practice, their own tradition. They're not trying to, obviously, they're not trying to change things, right? Which means that you won't get into conflict with them unless you come to their territory, right? Cultural conservatism is defensive fundamentally. They might talk bad about others, but it's not necessarily about changing that. That would be more social conservatism when we get to that. So it's about protecting what already is. Let's say again, separate. I'm not for this at all, but separate education, right? Because it is valuable, or simply just because people want it, right? And if enough people want it, well, that's how it is then. You should respect that. So this in practice, this is often about old traditions, like bullfighting, for example, is a conservative thing to like, right? You animal fans can talk about it, but there's value in bullfighting. It expresses bravery and the fight of man against nature, and we should not forget about this. It can be about, well, religion, obviously, right? Protecting religious practices, also if they're a bit weird sometimes, but that should be allowed on religious grounds because there's value to this tradition. Also protecting language is in being able to keep using words even if they're not politically correct, right? This is the most petty part often of conservatism, but anyway. And all kinds of cultural practices and keeping them revered in society. Now, cultural conservatism will mostly focus on religion, but it must be separated from religious fanaticism. True religious fanatics, like Islamic State, for example, are not conservative at all. It's a big mistake to call them conservative. They have nothing in common with conservatives because they want to change everything, right? They want to impose things that are not traditional. If in a country it is not traditional to kill people who smoke tobacco, then if you suddenly start doing that, then you're not a conservative, right? Because it's somewhere in a book 1,400 years ago. That doesn't make you conservative. It makes you revolutionary, if anything, right? You're not grounded in tradition if you're a religious extremist, because that's not what the country is doing. So it's important to separate them, that not every religious or ultra-religious person is actually conservative. If you go outside of tradition, if you want to go back to a past that didn't even exist, then you are some type of revolutionary rather than a conservative. In politics, this is the part of conservatism that you will find most often allying with nationalism. I didn't mention this yet. Conservatism is very good at allying. It's very good at teaming up with other ideas. On its own, it usually doesn't stand very strong. So conservatives will, in party politics, will usually try to find friends and kind of merge themselves with them or hang their wagon to their locomotive. And with cultural conservatives, it's often with nationalists because they have the same love for heritage, language, for the past of the nation, right? Any questions about this or things you want to say about this?
Me, this.
You.
Yes, this kind of reminds me of indigenous people. Like here in Mexico, there's like this thing of loving and protecting our indigenous traditions and buying their things, their artesanías. But when it comes to respecting and defending and giving them the rights and protect them as people, we don't.
You know, like we only want their like performance, but their them as people, we like no, don't touch me. We're kind of people kind of discriminates them, and it's
Well,
kind
it's
of
more than
funny.
that. Yes, I would say you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, because although I'm a sociologist, this, I have been only here for so long, but it's my impression that we often make indigenous people caricatures of themselves, as in they have to be shamans and believe in natural herbs and these type of things. Even if I've not been to too many indigenous communities, but the ones that I've been to, they just look like poor Mexicans to me, living like other poor Mexicans that would just like to have a little bit more money and better services, rather than invoke some kind of tribal god. I don't see them doing too much of that stuff, right? So I I think we often want indigenous people to be this mystical guy with feathers dancing type of thing, which they often are not. They're just working class people. So, um, yeah, I think we kind of have romanticized thing what they are, and that kind of stops us also from helping them because they're supposed to do things on their own because they're on their own. Does that make sense? Or do you think it's a wrong analysis?
No, it makes sense because, for example, one day I was talking with a member of an indigenous organization in Monterrey, and they were telling me that women will be like always loving their traditions and what they sell, but when it comes to indigenous feminicides, they don't give the like the how do you say
The same follow-up.
yes, they don't. Like they don't
Mhm.
put it on the news. They don't do anything. Like they only want, as they say, like this thing or as them as being witches or something like that. But when it comes
Mm.
just of being like normal people or poor people, they don't care because they're indigenous. Kind of ridiculous.
Oh, yeah, could be. Okay. Um,
I
that's
I want to ask if in Mexico, religious fanatics could be classified as like they could be classified as conservatives, right?
cultural conservatives. They could be, but power conservatives, which I'll get to later. Um, to be a cultural conservative, you need to protect something that actually exists. If you want to impose something on people that they're not already doing, you're not a cultural conservative. So if they're the type of people that want to make people do traditions that we didn't even do, then no. But I don't know which people you're referring to.
Maybe like Los Pro Vida, the defense.
No, well, I don't think they're fanatics, and that's on the border of a different type of conservatism too, which we'll get to right now.
Okay.
Also, it's a majority position, so that's I don't think they're forcing anything. At least not democratically speaking. Well, they're forcing things, but you know what I mean. Um, let's talk about social conservatism. I use this word. I will say this immediately. I use this word different than if you would Google it, um, because the Americans have their own language for things. What I mean with social conservatism is a conservatism that is social, not some other meaning to it. So socially or societally minded conservatism. So social conservative, another word for it would be paternalistic conservatism, which may be more accurate. But I had to give it a short title that would fit my diagram. Um, Social conservatism, what it tries to do is it tries to basically protect society. It tries to preserve the social fabric of communities, of society, and tries to protect the capacity of society to reproduce itself. So social conservatives, in my understanding of the word, are socially minded conservatives. Are conservatives that are very concerned with the social fabric. They think that society could break. if you change it too much, and they want to avoid that. They want to avoid collapse of society, basically. So it's a very community-oriented conservatism. It's also the one that I probably have most sympathy with. So from this point of view, society is an organism, right? Society is an animal with different components that works together, and it could die. You could, if you change things too much, the hamster is going to die, right? So this organism of society, which is very precious, it's what we all live in, and everything that you ever known comes from that. This is threatened. There are constantly disturbing things, there are constant changes that challenge the fabric of society and that threaten collapse of things. These threats could be from the outside. The market, for example, disturbs society. We saw this with the early communist theories, right? How free trade, etc., changes things. It changes demographics from countryside to city. It changes relationships between people. It takes away solidarity, it replaces it by greed, etc. These things are dangerous to the community. Technologies change it too, right? Robots. I'm very conservative in this regard. Society is based on the idea. Capitalism is based on the idea, fundamentally, if you read M. Smith, that every human, if they try to, can be useful. If you take away that premise, if not everybody who tries can be useful, then everything that's built upon that is going to collapse, right? Because I was very concerned with that. If you stop making work meaningful, and we have a society built on work, then it's extremely dangerous. But other technologies too, right? I don't know, porn, whatever. There's things that have the potential to disrupt Tinder, for example, that would disrupt relationships. That they make it different from how it normally works, make it looser, make it less stable. Changes can also come from within, right? Society can change demographically because people stop having children, for example, which is extremely dangerous. I'll get to that soon. Well, I let my inner conservative talk, right? I have to. It's the lecture. But you can have demographic change. Or people turn gay, or they think they're not actually women when they are. These things all change. This individualism also changed society. People stopped caring less for each other, started helping each other less. You get in very dangerous grounds, especially if your society is built on solidarity, right? In Mexico, for example, before the fourth transformation, the main social safety net was the family. If something goes wrong, you go live with your parents. If something goes wrong with your parents, they come live with you. That's how most people deal with problems. If you then destabilize this, and if people start being disconnected from their parents, so you take away the most important safety net. And this is very dangerous, conservatives would say. And well, nihilism and other things like that, atheism, etc., they might sound good, but isn't your generation going to a psychologist once a week? Huh? Your parents were not. So how is that working for you, would the conservatives say? Anyway, it's dangerous. So society is constantly challenged here. And social conservatives are simply scared of this. They think we're going to reach a point where things are going to go wrong. And the thing they fear the most is reproduction. That society is going to reach a point where it will fail in passing the torch, let's say, and it will just dissolve. Society, humans need to reproduce themselves, right? Not just for like biological reasons, also for economic reasons. It's very popular today. It's very popular today to have an opinion that goes like, pets are the new children, right? The idea that, oh, the family is outdated. I'm always shocked when I ask my students who of them want to have a family. Usually it's less than 10%. That is, I'm not even going to ask you because I'll sleep bad. But it is is shocking to older people. I'm already older. How little interest new generations have in maintaining families, which, from a conservative point of view, is very problematic. First of all, because they think the family is a basic building block in society. It's where, at the end of the day, all people come from. You take that out, things collapse. But also for economic reasons. Society without children is decadent because you will have a lesser economic base at the bottom. You have more old people at the top who are maintained by ever less young people. So your whole system of social security is in danger here. Your whole system of pensions is in danger because who's going to work to pay the taxes to pay for all the older single people who don't have children who take care of them, right? This is simply true. If you're progressive conservative, this is a problem that will have to be dealt with one way or the other. And conservatives choose to deal with this by trying to protect the family, by subsidizing it, for example, right? And also they are concerned with the things that maintain the family, like the institution of work. If there are big challenges to the labor market, robots, for example, but also that could be labor asking too much money, right? It could be too high wages. That could also be a challenge to the labor market from a socialist angle this time. They are scared of that, right? Because they think it would break the family. And if you break the family, then you can think you can do without, and you can pretend you do it for a good 10, 20 years, but then the real problem will become visible. And you will be old, alone, and without healthcare. So, better be concerned. So in practice, right, Mariana?
I have a doubt. Like, there's a, I don't know. Like, they say that okay, if there are not enough young people to have like to produce work and then maintain the pensions, but there's a lot of works that are not like useless, but like we have a lot of stuff. Like okay, maybe we don't need like 3 different fabrics of bottled water. I don't know. Like in the future, maybe if we, no sé, I don't know.
But that will make it worse, right? That would mean cutting jobs. That will make it even worse, the problem.
But but it's not sustainable to have a lot of like producing a lot of stuff. I don't know. Like I agree with that. Like we need to have jobs and work and everything, but also it needs to be a change, like in the way that we produce things because the environment and all that things. I don't know how
Well,
that's lined up with that.
it's okay to have open questions, right? Each theory is going to bring certain problems and questions that it just throws in front of you, right? Communism poses certain very critical questions, and so does conservatism from its own way. I do think families are undervalued. It's extremely hard to run a family, and they're very unsupported in society, I think. Um, so, well, that's not my opinion that I'm shining through, but I think there's more we could do to help people get kids. Otherwise, you're going to end up like Japan, where nobody has kids. Most couples don't even have sex for whatever reason, and this will lead to problems down the road, right? But that's largely, I talked to Japanese people about this in my sociology class at Tech. They say the main reason for this is economical. That it's not really possible to have a children because you both need careers and this and that. And in Japan, you need to work like 15 hours a day, and it's just not really possible if you're not on a manager level to do that and both be ambitious. So then the conservative solution would be to support families with money that you would get, or with childcare or whatever, right?
Uh-huh.
the solution can be positive. It's more about, it's not that you should, conservatives don't tell you, Marianne, that you need more children. They think that, but they won't say it. The real solution is that people who want children should be encouraged, should be helped to have them, rather. But again, that has an ecological cost, right? But that's ecology. That's a different ideology that we're not talking about today. But ecologists will make the opposite argument, right? But my job today is to explain the conservatives. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes. Well, I just wanted to say that, like, they fear, like, they see that the family is threatened by, but it's capitalism again, like the individualism that we live in that separates the family, but not the progressive.
Well, but I already told you that conservatism is inconsistent. That's a core quality of it. They're people who see different things, right? And they talk about what they see, not necessarily the bigger picture. Now back to social conservatism, right? The idea here in practice is that social conservatives are going to defend what works for the community. What has worked yesterday, what kept Mexico in this case together, right, is what we should protect. We should protect it against your frivolous individual aspirations. You might want to do something. You might, for example, want to pretend you're not a woman, but that is less important than the good of the community. So there's a communitarian ideology, right? It's the group over the individual here. That makes it more aggressive. Social conservatism is more intrusive than cultural conservatism because it's not just about we want to do what we do in our house. It's also about we should have more houses with more families in them. And if you want to do something different, or you want to change that, or you want to change the law that makes it harder for families, or that would allow it for, if you want to change that, whether it's through technology or by making certain things popular that are like making drugs popular, or legalizing drugs, for example, would be a social conservative concern, right? We should simply be able to stop that. If we, the majority, think that's bad for us, we should have control over that. They're not necessarily against change. They think we should control change, right? If you want to have abortion, well, that could be a danger to the morals of the community. And we, the majority, think you shouldn't. Therefore, you can't. That's a conservative position. So it's a bit more aggressive. It's more intrusive because just like communism, by the way, it puts the group, which puts it at odds with liberals, right? Here's where conservatives react against liberals, because liberals say the other way around. For liberals, the individual is more important than the community, even if the actions of the individual lead to disaster for the whole, right? If you do plain stupid stuff, or wasteful stuff, or dangerous stuff, that's on you, and you should be free. If you don't want to wear a mask and not get vaccinated, that's on you, right? Social conservatives would say, no mames, bam, you get vaccinated, motherfucker. There's no choice here, right? It's what's good for the community. So here you can see why social conservatism can ally with socialism. They're not the same thing, but they often find each other in protecting labor, in protecting families, in protecting vulnerable groups, things like that, right? More money for education, etc. They have common ground, so you can sometimes see these conservatives. Partido Encuentro Social is a good example of this, allying with the left because they agree on certain things that they think should get done. This is rare, but it can happen. Although they can also ally with the right, social conservatives, because they will also think that's important for people to work hard, right? And you don't want to give people too much, because then they will get lazy, and that's again dangerous again for the community, right? Or you don't want too much, if we don't have enough children, we're going to have more migrants coming in, and that's also dangerous, and because they're different. So it can ally with both, but it's the only version of conservatism that you will see left-wing people like myself sometimes have sympathy with. That's why it's easy for me to talk about that, because I'm kind of halfway towards this. And a lot of left people deep down are, a lot of socialists. At least I understand, because it comes from the same moral concern with community. Although it's going to take a different path than socialism, but they have some overlap there in protecting the children, right? They both want that. That's social conservatism. Aggressive, but to other ideologies, probably most likable side of it. But then, dear students, we have the third type, which is below this. It's at the actual core of conservatism. And that's power conservatism, which again is my own term. Don't Google it. You probably get like pictures of like strong conservatives, like you see Putin riding a bear, power conservative. But what I mean with power conservatism is people who are conservative in terms of power, right? Power conservatism is focused on preserving unequal relationships. It's about preserving domination in social relationships and privilege. It's about protecting the elite, basically. What you want to conserve is the unequal power relation, where typically, if you're in this camp, you're on the top. That or you're an idiot. But mostly you are in the privileged position when you have this type of beliefs, right? And I'm not an idiot, I should say that. Or you are confused, let us say, about what you would want. Or you're just a very scared person and you want to believe in the leader because you don't believe in yourself. That's it. You're not an idiot, you're not confused, you're not confident. But so power conservatism is about this, right? It's about privilege, about dominance, which is a very basic human drive that they focus on. So it starts from the idea that society naturally is hierarchical. That humans, the human community, and community is very valuable, right? See social conservatism. That the community has ranks in them. We are not the same, right? Power conservatives will explicitly defend inequality. They say this is how it has to be. People are not equal, right? And to live together, we need classes. Society functions in a certain way, but and the way it functions is by us not doing the same thing. You have natural leaders, you have natural followers. So I remember, I probably told this before, one day I was at some marriage counseling before I got married in the church. We had to take a course on this to get married here in San Pedro. And the lady doing it, she asked me, what do you do for a living? I said, well, I'm a professor and a researcher. What do you research in? Poverty. Ah, the poor. I like to believe that we all have our own place, you know. They do what they do down there, and we do what we must do up here. And we all have our own part to play, and it all works together, she told me. I thought, where are my keys? I need to get out of here. But anyway, this is the conservative idea, right? Classes have a function. It's supposed to be like this. This is how it works. And that means that you should respect the elites, right? The people who already have power, they either have it for traditional reasons, because they're the son of people who always have it, and, you know, like a monarchy. And you should respect that just because it's old, because it's traditional, because that's how it's done, and that has a power to it of its own. It's valuable because it's unique. Or they have it by merit because they're the best, they're the better, they're the wisest. They come from a good family, they are well prepared. And therefore the people in power deserve our respect, right? We shouldn't make fun of them, even if they fall, they do something stupid. You should know your place, right? And this, they will protect these people. often when they do missteps, you'll see that when a conservative person, I don't know, gets caught cheating, other conservatives, instead of being morally conservative and condemning them, they'll make excuses. They'll be like, yeah, but he can change. They will judge you, but not the one in power, because this looks hypocritical to them, but it's not, because the one in power is more important than you. We should give them more credit than you because, well, they've achieved something, right? You still need to prove anything. We can judge you harder than the elite because the elite deserves our respect. Matter of fact, denying the elite and come with this idea that we're equal is dangerous. We are not equal, either by tradition or by nature. People are different, and trying to pretend they are will lower, let's say, the most valuable people. Society, to use the biggest euphemism in political theory, society needs variety. That's their word for inequality. Real conservatives don't use the word inequality, they say variety. You have different types of people. Some are rich, others suffer. This is the way. So these elites, what they try to do, as Mariana said, they try to conserve mainly what works for them, right? They think society is good because society is good to them. So that's the part that they're trying to conserve, rather than any particular tradition or any particular part of social tissue. It's about you're standing on top of the castle and you want to keep the castle stable because that's what you're standing on. That's the conservative interest here. So in practice, right, what does it look like? Power conservatives are not for tyranny or anything like that. Right? They're not for an absolute monarchy. They are for a kind of broader elite. And they are for representation. People should be represented in politics. Just not in a direct democratic way. I'll explain this, but the goal here is to create balance. You should have a balance of interests, right? You have the interests of the poor, you have the interests of the middle class, you have the interests of the industry, of the church, of the old elite, of the judges, of the state, and all these groups, right? They should be heard. And they should be heard equally. They, of course, are not equal in numbers, right? Poor, by far the biggest group, but that doesn't make them more important. We should pay attention to all interests, variety, right? So we should have representation of interests here. That could be, for example, in a Senate or a parliament, right? Where people represent, like lawyers, more or less, different factions. Like in the United States Senate, you have the guy who represents the credit card companies, you have the guy who represents the oil industry, you have the guy who represents the weapon industry, or all of them, right? And you have Bernie Sanders who represents labor. It's fair, right? You have variety. So they are democratic in a formalistic sense, in the sense that they like parliaments and they like power sharing. They don't think that one person should have all power because that's too radical. You should have a representation of different elites. And it's constant throughout history that they're for this, right? So it's very beautiful to conservatives is a kind of, like we have in Mexico, the plurimilares, I pronounce it wrong. Plurinominal system, where half the people are not actually elected. That's perfect, because then the elites get to choose half the people, right? Party elites. And the hoi polloi, the normal people, La Raza, they don't need to concern themselves too much, right? They have to elect some people, and then those people will elect the others. So it is democratic in a very formalistic sense, like parliamentary democracy, yes. Actual power to people, no. No such silliness as consultancies or even direct representation or proportional voting. No. The normal people should be kept away from power, right? We should listen to them, but not listen to them. We should hear them, better said, right? we have to represent the people. Politicians should follow them. But we should actually do what they want, because the people don't know, right? If you go back to Burke, they don't have a good stock of reason on their own. They are unprepared. This is the key word of power conservatives. You've heard this a lot, the word unprepared, right? So a typical power conservative position is that the poor shouldn't vote. You've heard this too. That, you know, I think somebody of Frena said this explicitly. He said, but, oh, so now the power is with the servants or what? Los servientes, right? Is that what's happening to Mexico? I think I saw it on a slogan. Stop the servientes, or stop the rule of the servientes. That's what they want, right? The servants, the people who clean your house, they, you know, we will vote for them, right? They're part of our family. We will do that. The poor shouldn't vote. They don't know what they're doing. They're stupid. This is a power conservative position. You should have representation, not dictatorship. But although you can have dictatorship, but not, you know, don't give too much power to the crowd. Now, power conservatism can take any form depending on who has the power, right? That could be some military dictatorship, that could be an aristocracy. In our world today, in the West, in our continent, that means capitalism, right? As power conservatives will side with capitalism because that's where the elite is. That's who they are. So they will protect capitalist relationships. In the past, that's not true, right? They would side with aristocracy against the capitalists, but that's 200 years ago. So power conservatism, the Republican Party is a good example of power conservatism. It's mainly about protecting property, right? Property, mind you, is a social relationship. Property is not something God-given. Property means that you respect that property means that other people can tell you not to touch things, right? Property is you respecting that you cannot use a certain thing because it belongs to someone else. It's an imaginary thing. You need to be convinced that something is somebody else's property for it to be property. So it's something that must be protected. It's a fiction in a way, and I don't mean it in a negative sense. It's a construct that must be kept alive by repeating how important it is. So it must be defended at all costs. And all costs means all costs, including killing communists, etc. Which means that power conservatives, if they're going to ally, which they almost always do, they will typically ally either with the liberals, neoliberals, even if they disagree with them on social conservatism, but they will just give in. They'll say, yeah, whatever, have your abortion, or have, no, not that, but like whatever. Market forces, okay, destroy communities, it's okay, as long as we keep the power. Or they will ally with fascists, right? The far nationalist side, who also are for the elite, who believe in natural leaders, who agree with them on that. They have to, because power conservatism, like on the face, is not a particular powerful thought. It's not very convincing to most people because it's against most people, right? It's hard to get a democratic majority against the democratic majority unless you ally with other forces. And it's also kept alive in our current culture. Power conservatives typically are the people who will be very, in Mexican context, very malinchista, very classist, will talk down the lower classes. One of the main ways to keep people down is making them believe they belong there, making them believe that they ain't shit and you are lazy and so is your dad and you should be ashamed and don't come to our private school, right? And you're lazy and you're drunks and you should raise your children better. These kind of discourse is very common amongst this type of conservatism. Now, my final point to make. Maybe they're right. Yeah, you could make the argument for natural leadership, etc. I have one big problem with conservatism as a whole, and because of power conservatism. I'm not going to go too long into criticism. But the main problem here is that you have these three layers, but the core is the power one, right? A conservative party our conservative movement, typically we have an elite leading them, an actual elite. People with actual money will be behind them. And thus the interest of this movement will be shaped by them. So what you get is that you have power conservatism that's going to use other types of conservatism to defend itself. It will hide behind the mask of tradition, behind the mask of protecting society, to keep its own elite in power, to keep dominance going. Dominance of any kind, right? Not necessarily, you don't need to be the king to be a power conservative. You could just be very patriarchal in your own family, right? As the father or the grandfather. That's also power conservatism. Or within an institution or whatever, a school. So the problem here is there's a kind of fundamental dishonesty in conservatism as an organized thing, not in conservatives, but as an organized movement, in the sense that you have power conservative at the center. And that's the part that you don't see. You interact with, in debates you have with conservatives, usually are about social or cultural things, right? And what elites will do, in my opinion, is my criticism, is that they will bribe other groups. So I'm going to keep my power, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you power over some weaker people. And that's going to entertain you, right? For example, you're going to be lower class your whole life, because we're not sharing with you, but you're still the king of your own house, right? You might be a servant outside, but in your own house, mijo, right? You're the king, and you're served by your wife and your children, right? So machismo is a kind of bribe, I feel, that the elite gives to lower classes. That, okay, we kick you around, but you get to kick someone else around too. And if you have nothing else than that, you will defend that. And that's very understandable, actually, because, well, the rest of life is you being kicked around. So you will double down on traditions that give you an identity, they give you respect. That also for women, by the way, right? Machismo is more than men dominating women. It's also women wanting certain roles that give them dignity, right? And that also, you can make the same argument for racism, etc., xenophobia. They're like bribes. You are going to be giving into your dominant instincts by giving other people permission to do the same. And you can have a kind of alliance of naughtiness, let's say, like an implicit alliance of we're going to let our instincts, our fears, our dominance be. We're going to give in to that, and we're going to support each other in that. Also, if we talk about fears, these elites will often use the fear of these other conservatives or social conservatives, which is a genuine fear, kind of genuine moral care for the community, which I really respect, not always agree with, but do respect. They will use their fears of things to support their own positions. The most clear case here is the Republican Party in the US. What the Republican Party wants on any given issue that's not cultural is a minority position. Trump's tax breaks polled under 20%, for example, under 20% approval, right? Giving more money to rich people is not a popular position. If you would go to the voters with that message, you will lose. So what you do is that you campaign on anti-abortion. And you keep a part of the population who for moral reasons are against abortion, because they think it's murder, and you can make that argument, right? That's a logically consistent argument. You leave them no choice, because either you're gonna, allow murder, which to them is morally not, they can't live with that. But to stop that, you have to vote for these annoying rich people, right? And you need to support them. So all these cultural issues that we spent, to me, this is one giant distraction, all these cultural wars, whether it's about abortion or about, in the US, guns, or whatever it is. These are things that don't really matter that much, in my opinion, but you might disagree with me, but anyway, They're things that keep people divided and have people support certain elites that they would otherwise never support, right? So the protection of the family. If you want to protect your religion, apparently you need to vote right wing, because they're the ones who are going to do it, and therefore you empower privatization with your same vote, right? You think you're voting for religion, but you're also privatizing Pemex with the same vote. So they will keep scared people hostage, which I don't like. I think this is a kind of disgenuine politics, and this is what makes conservatism in practice so hypocritical, because they will pick and choose, right? They don't really care. A lot of conservatives did abortion, right? Are married to foreigners, or did divorce 10 times. Trump is a great example of this, right? Trump is married to a foreigner on his third wedding and cheated on her with 15 different women, including porn stars. Yet conservatives will back him. They'll say, no, he's the candidate of God. It doesn't make too much sense to me. But the point is not, the whole conservative part often is an act, right? It's not, you be conservative in social and cultural issues when that's convenient politically. If it goes against your power interest, suddenly you let go. And this is my main problem with it. Okay, I've ranted too long on this. But if I would have one criticism of conservatism, it's this. There's a kind of maskedness to it, where you have this power conservatism, which kind of steers the others. Not always, they exist on their own. I know many people who are socially conservative but hate the elites are people who are culturally conservative who have nothing to do with any of this. But in electoral politics, they'll often be mushed together in the same corner against their will, largely. And that's it. I talk too much. Back to you. What questions do you have? Or remarks you might want to make? Let me ask first, does it make sense, my lecture? Because this is something I invented yesterday night. Like, does it make sense? Did it improve your understanding of the world or not?
Actually, it's very good, teacher.
Okay.
Yeah, it makes sense, but I don't know why I feel like there's something missing. Like, I don't know.
What
But
is
it was-
it? Well, you're probably right in that feeling, but let's try to figure out what it is.
But for example, in the slide of power conservatism, like if I will erase the elite privilege and put the name of patriarchy, I think it will be the same. Like you were talking and I was imagining that. Literally.
What does
Like this
patriarchy
idea
mean?
of being like we need a hierarchy and because it's a man you have to respect them and you know like it sounded kind of like that. But however, I have a question. Like political theories, like for example, communism or environmentalism, like is an internal threat or it is external threat? Because I mean, ideologies must be really harmful for this balance.
I don't know. I didn't think through my categorization that deeply. But new ideas, right? Well, it depends if they come from the inside or the outside, right? New ideas, yeah, they could be an internal threat. They can also come from the outside, sometimes literally, right? If you're a Middle Eastern country and then the Americans invade you and try to change your way of living, well, that's an exterior threat to the social fabric of society. You could, for example, make the argument that gender ideology as a whole, and if we talk about more the trans part of it, is a Hollywood thing. If we're honest about this was popularized by the Kardashians. It existed before that, but it became mainstream. Everybody knows about it because of this type of things, which is an external thing, right? So you could portray or you could experience this as an outside change in ideas that's kind of tricking the youth and therefore leading to mental disorders. But on your note of machismo, it's part of it, right? Or well, patriarchy. I don't necessarily know what that means. If you take the word serious, an archy, it would be a political system, right? With a man at the top based on family lineage. You mean, I think what you mean is machismo, or not? Or what do you mean with patriarchy?
What I mean with patriarchy, I mean of this conception that, like the basic, men are above and women are on the lower point of society, because we are women and because we too many things. I mean, patriarchy, like the archy, like comes actually from the hierarchy. Like there's like a pyramid.
Okay. So, well, I think that is part of it. I think that's not at the core of it. But I think, as I just explained, I think it's a bribe. I think it's by keeping that intact, you keep the larger pyramid intact.
Yes, because
And it is a form of privilege, and it is convenient to people with power to keep it that way. And then you're going to be conservative.
yes, I also thought that maybe like social media was actually a big threat for conservative. I think that is one of the most, because in media you have too many things going on, and too many things going like mainstream, or too many people making questions. Because like no, I don't know, even social media has like threatened democracy for some governments. So for the conservative people, this must be really chaotic.
Yes, I think that makes sense in theory. In practice, though, I think so. I like in what actually happened in the last 10 years. I think social media allowed a revival of conservatism.
Why?
Something like Frenna was unthinkable without social media. You need to spread certain ideas fast without being able to check them to old people to get to Frenna. If this had to happen via town meetings, somebody would have interrupted and been like, dude, what the fuck are you talking about, right? You would not have gotten to this point. And in the US, you can see the same. I think conservatives, because they actually play the politics game more than others, they're better at it. I think they conquered social media. I think social media was a threat. I think now it's more of a tool. But I don't know. It's interesting. I don't have the answer. I'm sorry. Diego, you have the answer, maybe.
Yeah, I think. Actually, I met a guy like a month or two ago that used to work in El Norte some months ago when was the effervescence of Frena. And he told me that the the bosses in El Norte redaction, they were pressuring them, the people who manage the social media and all the notes, that they have to cover all of the things that Frena do. So they were all the time in all the media of El Norte, like always. How do you say it? Actualizar?
Yeah.
Yeah, the actualizando the information to give like a lot of space to Frena and all those things.
Yes. Of course. That's Mexican media. Um, I strongly believe in the concept of mafia de poder. I think it's a very accurate thing. And that's exactly how it works. But yeah, certainly there are things missing. Let me tell you about what we will talk about later. Next time. For next time, I want you to read a text called 10 Principles of Conservatism. It's very short. It's like a web page. It's 3 pages or something. by Russell Kirk, an actual conservative theorist, one of the 20. And I want you to think about that in a Mexican context. And this is a text written by a conservative, right? It's very loving. It's a defense of it. And I want you to think of 5, so you can pick which ones, but I want you to think of 5 examples of that in Mexico. And that is Thursday, what we will discuss in class. So this could be examples as in policies, but it could also be positions, things that powerful conservatives said, or certain social movements that try to do that. And we're going to talk about some conservative policies. I have a feeling that most of you are not conservatives. Is that correct? I suspect the one with the green hair not to be one, but I don't know about the others.
I think not. Like, I don't know
Not
about
truly.
Hugo. Like, the other ones, I know that they are not a conservative, but I don't know about Hugo.
As with any ideology, right? My goal is to kind of, well, to make you understand it, right? So I want to also next time talk about some conservative policies that I will post to you, and try to have a serious discussion on them, including what are the merits of this, and like why is this good, or why could this be good, or how could you understand the logic behind it, to improve your general understanding of things. Then we're going to talk next week about neoconservatism, which is something completely different, but you should know the word. Neoconservatism is basically this applied to international relations. And we're going to talk about religious fundamentalism. And next Thursday we will talk about the center, about centrist conservatism, social democracy, and things like that. All right, does that sound more complete?
Yes. No, but actually, like, of course, this lecture was like really helpful because while you were talking, I realized that most of the people, because even I don't like separate things like liberalism and conservatism. Like, I believe that conservative is more like being static than actually like a theory, as you said at the beginning. So when we say like you're a conservative, most of the time what we are meaning is like you're a neoliberalist or you're a liberal. You know, like we don't use the correct words. So like that this was kind of helpful in that way.
The main difference between them in practice, because they want roughly the same thing in economic terms, is that conservatives see it as like the best thing we got so far, while liberals are actually utopic about capitalism. They think capitalism is the road to salvation, right? This is a higher society which will make humans reach new heights, and conservatives don't harbor these illusions, and they're not utopic. They think they think everything sucks and this sucks the least. So and it works for them, um, while liberals are more optimistic, and from that basic difference you get all kind of other differences.
Yeah, because like actually in like leftish theories, like you of course have some conservatism. Like last weekend, I have this internal conflict, for example, with feminism. That too many girls are saying that we must support feminist pornography, and I'm like, no, like I don't want pornography. Like I want to abolish it. Like, and you start to see that even in such radical theories, there's always like this conservative part that doesn't want that change, and it's kind of
course you have
funny.
it. Right? You have also, I think, growing part of feminism, which hates the whole gender idea. That gender is fluid. That they think women are women and men are men, and women deserve more respect, and that's it. And yeah, so they do blend a bit with each other. All right. next time we'll have more discussion. I hope some more general participation too. And well, that's Thursday. Take care and protect society against evils, right? And do your duty. All right.
Take care, teacher. Thank you.
Thanks, Victor.
Thank you.
Have a nice day.
Yes. Bye.